Vision? What do you know about my vision? My vision would turn your world upside down, tear us under your illusions, and send the sanctuary of your own ignorance crashing down around you. Now ask yourself, are you really ready to see that vision?
The chapel is dedicated to Santa Maria de los Buenos Aires. Saint Mary of the Good Winds was the patron saint of navigators and a favorite of Columbus. This altar painting dates from shortly after Columbus died and features what's considered the first and most accurate portrait of the great explorer on the left. It's also thought to be the first painting of Indians done in Europe. The Virgin's cape seems to protect everyone under it, even the Indians.
When I was reading to prepare for this interview, I was quite surprised to see you use the word Aborigines talking about African Americans.
You know, I've dealt with that issue. I've already, talked publicly about that.
And my purpose here today is to say that I'm very sorry, and I apologize to anyone whose feelings were hurt by my comment.
Meeting, probably 95% African American, and because of, things that I regret, offhand remark I should not have made.
Using the word Aborigines.
Right, offhand remark I should not have made.
The 60s in this country, and that's why that's why society follows sport. Sport doesn't follow society, because in sport we do look at each other as equals and as human beings, except for when they're talking about hiring people in management.
Right. The Rooney Rule still don't come through yet. I mean,
but on the playing field, it's about who we as human beings, who can help us win. Right? And that's what Red Auerbach and Bill Russell stood for. Now, when they walked outside of the arena, then they had to make the choice. Do they accept the construct, again, of race? And if you accept the construct of race, then on top of that, you are allowed to have racism when you accept the construct of race. But if we all are human beings, then we can't have racism or racist.
You know, when we look at, so I'm like you guys, I celebrate American history, which is our history, every month out the year. And I hope that for parents and kids that go home, now we have the internet, now we have tools at our hand. And no, you aren't being taught Black American history in schools, but now we can still go out and find that history. It's not like when we grew up and maybe it was buried someplace in the encyclopedia. All you got to do is go type in some words and you can get it right now and understand where you've come from and how special you are.
Can I just end with this one thing? These four brothers sitting here, we didn't all come from Africa. And there was there was a country before 1492, and our history goes way beyond 1492. So you can't start us at 1492. We were always here. We were always here. We were always here. We were always here.
Thank you. shelters are much older than the Indians. Here, hunters chase giant armadillos, an animal that flourished during the Ice Age, long before the arrival of the Indians. But if people had been here before the American Indians, surely there would be other traces of their presence. The archaeologists continued to dig, down to depths 50,000 years old. And then they found this. Fragments of animal bone and charcoal. They are the oldest skulls in the Americas. And this is the oldest of them all. So who was Luthia, and where did she come from? To find out, the skull was taken to a hospital in Rio de Janeiro to begin the process of reconstructing her face. The first stage was to make a three-dimensional CAT scan of Luthia's skull in order to build a replica. The cast was then given to Richard Neve of the University of Manchester in England, one of the world's leading forensic artists, to recreate her features.
That, to me, is a Negroid face that has all the features that you associate with a Negroid face. The proportions of the face, it doesn't say anything about it being a Mongoloid.
Was this then the face of a first American? Her reconstruction is confirmed by measurements Walter Nevis has taken of all his skulls.
The first reaction was not to believe in it. But as the results, repeated so many times, and the result is exactly the same thing. They are very similar to nowadays Aborigines and Africans, and no similarity at all with Mongoloids in Asia or with American Indians.
When I was reading to prepare for this interview, I was quite surprised to see you use the word Aborigines talking about African Americans.
Is this you discussing Indian blood? We're going to judge people by whether they have Indian blood, whether they're qualified to run a gaming casino or not?
That probably is me, absolutely. Because I'll tell you what, if you look at some of the reservations that you've approved, you, sir, in your great wisdom have approved, I will tell you right now, they don't look like Indians to me.
Wait a minute. Wait a minute. Wait, first of all, you're not going to speed past that like you didn't just say what you just said.
I will tell you right now, they don't look like Indians to me, and they don't look like the Indians. Now, maybe we say politically correct or not politically correct. They don't look like Indians to me, and they don't look like Indians to Indians.
Don't waste your time on those junkyard losers. This country was built on genocide and slavery. We killed all the black guys that were here, and then we shipped in new black guys of our own. And then we brought in Jesus like a bar of soap. Let's go. You know it.
Let's go back in time when the American Indians looked like I look.
Entering the dance arena at this time, we have our Eastern Men War Dancer. Following our Eastern Men War Dancers, we have our Eastern Traditional Dancers. Men's Traditional Dancers.
All glory go to the Creator. It's an honor to be here today. But I love the theme, American healing. Well, first let's think about something. Where did America come from? Have it always been America? Or was it just created to be America? Who are the real Americans? America keep changing and changing and changing. Let's go back in time when the American Indians looked like I look and roamed the southeast part of the United States freely. I love what the mayor said. We have to tell the truth. We cannot heal America till we fix the foundation. Can we start right there?
I'm going to make it real easy for you. Get the list insofar as they're accessible of Indians who were treated for acute alcoholism over a 20-year span and match it up with the list of the people who were in residential schools. 50% of the population acute alcoholic, 50% of the population run through the schools. Gee, I wonder if that's a statistical coincidence. If they weren't in the school, see if they don't have a parent who was. And I will guarantee you that you're going to get a statistical correlation that's absolutely overwhelming. And when you got half of any population placed in that sort of a condition, the general culture is going to be in utter mess. Surprise, surprise, Indians are in an utter mess. But when you're looking for DNA links, you're trying to blame the victim. When you're trying to find things inherent to the cultures that precipitate this condition, you're trying to blame the victim. They've got every possible elegant, sophisticated, esoteric, completely off the chart of scientific probability explanation that needs intensive investigation except the obvious one that you did it to them. And there's a responsibility that comes with that. And the whole charade in academia and theorizing is to avoid exactly that responsibility, but hey, we're all Americans, aren't we? Is there anything we don't try to shirk responsibility for?
In the late 1800s, there was something called the Dawes Rolls, which was basically a census that made records of people's ethnic backgrounds in order to determine which Native American tribes would get certain land allotments and other benefits. After slavery, many black people were associated with some of these tribes by bloodline, through marriage, through adoption, and even servitude. And because they were associated with these tribes, many black people were entitled to some of these benefits. The government did not want blacks to get these benefits, so they created a separate freedmen's list specifically for black people. They also started to list any full-blooded Native American who had African features as black because they didn't want them getting those benefits either. At the same time, they allowed white citizens to come in and pay money under the table to be listed as part Native American.
1895 and 1896, when a lot of the whites found out the benefits that these blacks are going to be entitled to, a lot of whites went to the Dawes Commission and say, look, why don't you put my name on there? They said, but you're not an Indian. So that's what they said, well, I'll give you $5. So the rule got around, the policy got around that for $5 that a white could put his name on the Dawes rolls and be called himself an Indian and be entitled to all these benefits, and all their children could be entitled to all these benefits forever. And so that became known as what's called a $5 Indian. And so if you go around now and check most of the Indians, the so-called Indians in America, about 90% of them are not even Indians. Those are just whites now who are passing as Indians. But they're getting all the benefits. And they're not paying any taxes, getting free college education. They put up a little reservation on the land that they don't live on. They have another home off and get all kind of benefits.
Iron Eyes Cody was another famous Native American person, He was in the media for years. In the 1970s, they utilized him for this pollution commercial. He was known as the Crying Indian. So he was a very well-known Native American in American culture. But the reality is, Iron Eyes Cody wasn't Native American at all. He was Sicilian. Both of his parents were from Sicily. So he didn't have one drop of Native American blood in him. He was another fake Indian.
Well, this here's my new Bronc Buster. This is my daughter, Catherine. Shalom Aleichem, Jackson 2 Bears.
Mr. Ballou, what's the use of saying Shalom Aleichem to me? I'm a full Sioux Indian. I'm not one of the chosen people.
All right, go ahead being stubborn if you want it.
No, I ain't stubborn.
Oh, not much you ain't. You know, according to an ex-congressman of these United States I heard give a lecture at the Chautauqua this winter, Indians is the lost tribe of Israel, but he won't admit it.
Just ain't true.
He was an ex-congressman of these United States, I tell you.
Oh, Papa, maybe he was mistaken.
Oh, no, he was not. Jackson just got a mean, stubborn streak in him is all. I brought Mr. Bernstein, the telegraph operator, out here from town last month, and he stood right where you're standing now, and he talked Hebrew at Jackson for 10 minutes by my watch, and Jackson pretended he didn't understand a word. Now, I call that stubborn.
Well, I didn't understand a word.
You see what I mean? Now, you get that trunk down out of there. I'll get the satchel.
That it's actually Hebrew. They had published this originally upside down. They threw it in a box at the bottom of the Smithsonian, put it in the basement. Many years later, a scholar took it out of the box, looked at it, and went, oh my gosh, it's upside down. It's Phoenician, ancient Hebrew. So what's going on here? What is that about? Where is that history? I'll show you in a few minutes, and we're going to have a conversation, and I'm going to show you some more things that the Smithsonian, science, government, commerce colluded to erase. By the way, I want to thank the directors of the documentary Lost Civilizations of North America for bringing these stories to my attention. I was blown away. To find more, visit the website lostcivilizationdvd.com. Here's the thing we should be asking ourselves. I don't know the story of these. Do you know that? Did you know that? Do you live in Ohio and did you know that? Why not? Were the American Indians wronged? Yes. Yes. And that's what we focus on in America. Is we were bad to the American Indians. Forget about it. It's in the past. The question should be the ones that the founders asked. Who are they? What knowledge do they have? Can you imagine the difference we would have now if we would put our differences aside and put our past in the past and concentrate on today and say, let's learn from each other. What do you have? What is that? What is that? When we come back, I'm going to be joined by Peter Lilback, who is, I've told you before, is one of my favorite authors. He's going to talk to me a little bit about the founders here. And I'm also going to show you some documents that show how that history has been erased. Next. This is the Smithsonian Annual Report, 1882-1883. This is John Wesley Howell. This is an original copy. John Wesley Howell in 1789. Again, this is Powell. This is the director of the Bureau of Ethnology at the Smithsonian Institute. He said this. Artifacts found prior to Christopher Columbus's arrival would be considered illegitimate by the Smithsonian. Only the savage Indian culture would be observed, and this created the artificial barrier to science. Only the savage. Science was colluding with government because of commerce, and religion was involved. Now, why do I tell you all this stuff? Not because I'm an Indian expert or anything else. You got to do your own homework. I just found out about this stuff. I'm amazed.
Just told her that my mother Chickasaw from Okinawa, Mississippi, so she gonna shed a little more light on
native
my people,
black people.
Yes,
that is talking about. You know, everybody came over and we were all slaves. No, you can even check it on the internet, right?
Right.
Before the continent shifted, which is what we call in this Kali Yuga and stuff. You can check from all the way from Tibet, and you'll see exactly where. Check Hanumanji, That's in all of the pyramids and Mayan stuff. It's right there. You got it written in Sanskrit. Just look for the elephant. I mean, what the elephant doing over this side here? And from there, take your own stuff and find out your own history. Because all of it coming.
What do you know about there's pyramids here in the Americas?
The way before them. They all think the way before all of that. So just check all the pyramids right down inside there. It's your own hometown. Just go and look at whatever they call in cartouche or whatever.
Right. And your family comes from where? You say?
Oh, I'm Guyanese. We're all the way down in the Amazon. We live among the Mapuche.
Okay.
Check the Mapuche.
I've read a little bit about that's enough, sister.
All I'm offering is the truth, nothing more.
The miniseries is a remake of the very popular miniseries originally airing in the 1970s, based off of the New York Times best-selling book Roots, The Saga of an American Family, which was supposedly about the history of the author's family and their involvement in being slaves, but it turned out to be a total fabrication and a hoax, and plagiarized various other novels, now said to be just a novel instead of a hoax. So the History Channel this week is airing a remake of it, and some outlets are pointing out the, quote, problematic history. The New York Post was afraid to call it a hoax. Other outlets will denounce it for the hoax that it is. The Town Hall website, Alex Haley's Roots, the History Channel, to remake a lie. There's one problem, the website says. Roots is a fake and Haley is a fraud. And a fraud on multiple levels.
And Alex Haley hadn't wrote none of that. You know, I was out there doing it because I don't care what you think of me. I know he didn't write it. The senior editor of Playboy magazine, Murray Fisher, wrote all of that stuff, okay? And if you punch up on your computer, Harry Hollander, who wrote one of the best books on Africa called The African, a white boy, Kunta Kinte came out of his book word for word. Huh?
Oh, wow.
And if you check out the trial in upstate New York, where a federal judge made the publisher and Alex Haley pay him $650,000 and then chastised, made him apologize to him in the court, and the judge said, I worked a lot of these cases, but I never saw anybody take something word for word like you.
By the Van Sertimer of Rutgers University, the author of the book, They Came Before Columbus. Welcome.
Good to be here, Gil.
Now, there's been a lot of discussion lately about Mr. Columbus and what he did and what he did not do. But your research that you've expounded on in previous programs as years gone by, your thesis is older. That our presence in this hemisphere preceded the enslavement period. That there was another period where Africans came. Tell me a little bit more about that and how it pertains to this discussion of Mr. Columbus nowadays.
Well, the first thing that we have to understand is that to assume that Columbus was the first to make contact with the Native Americans is something that does not take account of any of the evidence, including the evidence of Columbus himself. Columbus was the first person to suggest there were Africans in America before him. He actually says in the journal of his second voyage that when he was in Haiti, the Native Americans there told him that black-skinned people had come in large boats from the south and southeast trading in gold-tipped metal spears. Columbus actually sent back samples of these gold-tipped metal spears back to Spain. They were assayed, they were inspected by metallurgists in Spain, And the Spanish metallurgists showed that they were identical with spears being forged in African Guinea. Of 32 parts, 18 were of gold, 6 of silver, and 8 of copper, just like the spears in the Caribbean. The words that were used by the people in the Caribbean that Columbus met in Haiti were identical with the words used in Africa all along the Atlantic coast, a range of words used for these spears.
Are there a lot of writings from Mr. Columbus, by Mr. Columbus, that survive? How do you know that he wrote?
Oh, yes. Columbus made up a lot of things, but he wrote quite a lot. I mean, he made up a lot about his background, even his name, etc. But there is no question that he wrote he had at least 4 of his 4 major voyages. He left quite a lot of papers. There's a book published in this country in 1903, 2,114 pages, just on the surviving writings of Columbus, diaries of Columbus, things said about Columbus in connection with these diaries.
Well, before we get into the era that preceded him, let's talk a little bit about Mr. Columbus. Who was he? Was he an Italian? What was his name?
There's a question about Columbus. I have not gone very much into his identity because I know he made up so many things. There's a lot of confusion about that. A book by Frederick Paul, The New Columbus, suggests that he was the bastard son of someone called Colon. His name was Cristobal Colon, and that he took the name Cristoforo Colombo from a dead sailor because he'd been involved in some battle that opposed the Spanish sovereigns, and he needed them at a certain time, and he didn't want them to know about it, so he took on a different identity. There are lots of stories told about him.
So that would suggest he was Spanish. Colon?
Yes, he wasn't Italian, but I don't want to say he was Spanish because I'm making it quite clear there's a lot of confusion about his identity. And I have not been very much involved in that because my great concern has been to show that most people who are opposed to this thesis of an African connection with America are opposed because they assume that Europe was an advance, always an advance of other peoples, and that the reason why Columbus could sail and make contact first was because of the advance in their shipping. What we know now in 12 disciplines. Columbus, by the way, was not the only person to note these blacks. There are at least a dozen Europeans who noted them in that within the first 50 and 100 years, seeing them in places where they had not been. There's a whole range of them. Peter Martyr, Vasco Nunez de Balbo in 1513, finding blacks among the Native Americans. And he actually asked these people, where did these blacks come from? And they said, we don't know, but they're a large settlement nearby.
Just a bit more about Mr. Columbus because there's so much discussion. To the best of your knowledge, what was the premise of his voyage? Was it exploration or was it exploitation?
What Columbus hoped to achieve, you see, is that a lot of excitement had developed in Europe about the voyages of Marco Polo, about the riches of India, etc. And to get a route to the rich Indies would be a great achievement. But he assumed that because the world was wrong, and that was not his idea, the Moors had made that quite clear, that the world was wrong, and that if you go far to the west, you end up in the east. He assumed that you could go to the west and end up in India. And he was so convinced of that, that although he landed on the edge, on the little islands on the edge of America, he did not know it was a new continent. He assumed he was off the edge of Asia. Even if he had doubts, he sent his notary, Fernando Perez de Luna, among the ships and made every man sign a document he was off the coast of Asia. And he threatened his men. If they were common sailors and they were to go back home and say that they had not been off Asia, they would be whipped and they would have their tongues cut out. And if there were officers, they would be fined 500 maravedis. We do not know exactly what 500 maravedis was at that time, but it must have been quite a punishment. So Columbus had to convince the Spanish that he had got to the Indies. And however, something happened which he did not expect. they were discussing a demarcation line with Portugal, because Portugal insisted that they should have a line drawn at the westernmost edge of the Cape Verde Islands, just off Africa, and that 375 leagues should be theirs. And this line, in fact, included Brazil. I have a map of Brazil in 1448. This is more than half a century before Columbus. A map that was drawn on knowledge gained from the Moors. This is known as the Andrea Bianco map. So that, you see, the whole approach was that here we are, this is a great adventure, this is for wealth, etc. To hell with the people. I mean, the people were treated in the most awesome manner. Hands were cut off if they didn't pay the tax. I mean, the most incredible massacres. And Columbus was the first person to actually initiate slavery, because he actually took half a dozen Native Americans with him back to Spain. And people are under the assumption, oh, these natives, they were so stupid, they thought the whites were gods. That is not the case. He left a fort in the Caribbean after his first voyage, and every man in that fort was slaughtered when the natives realized that, that these people were vulnerable. There are all sorts of things in that situation, but Columbus was absolutely heartless when it came to dealing with the natives. Even when they were kind to him, and he recorded in his diaries how generous these people were, he was so determined, the profit motive was so great, he was so greedy, that it didn't really matter. I mean, people became nothing.
To start your day with all the news and information you need to know, start your morning with Emerge. Subscribe today. Call 1-800-532-5700. That's 1-800-532-5700.
Well, before we go on, what thoughts run through your mind as you see forces being mobilized this year to engage in a massive celebration of this man?
Well, I think that it should be understood that this so-called discovery was a discovery for Europe, and that this led to the ascendancy of Europe. It wasn't purely an accident, because 1492 is a very unusual year. It was not only the year Columbus sailed, it was the very year that the Africans were defeated in Spain. The Moors were defeated in January 1492. The African general Boabdil surrendered in 1492 in Granada, so that the ascendancy of Europe, the 1492 marked the ascendancy of Europe. The tragic thing is that since that time, we have assumed, or been made to assume by the histories that have been written, is that people of Native American descent or African descent had inferior civilizations, and that everything European was superior, and that is the reason why Europe gained the ascendancy.
All right. Now let's go back in time to when our ancestors began to reach this hemisphere. Did they engage in hostilities, or were they able to live harmoniously with the indigenous population in this hemisphere?
Well, it depends on the period. In such a short time, I could only touch on the late 14th, 15th century period.
Well, when did it start?
It started much earlier from different Africans, okay? Because we have evidence in pre-Christian times of Africans entering certain parts of Mexico and South America. We have it from, in terms of various sculptures and in terms of a range of ritual parallels. But in the 14th and 15th century, we move on far more certain ground, because the evidence exists in a dozen disciplines. We have writing. They have found one of the African scripts. They have found African boats that could make those crossings. They have found maps indicating a crossing had been made. They have found linguistic connection showing words. They found plants, an American plant in Africa before Columbus, an African plant in America, more than one in fact. African plants in America before Columbus. They found a range of things like this apart from the eyewitness accounts.
Any idea what the motivation might have been for Africans coming to this hemisphere?
In the case of Abu Bakr II, this we know. The earlier visits, we can only conjecture that there could have been upheavals in the African world, like the Syrians attacking the Egyptians, etc., flights and so forth, trade, etc. But in the case of Abu Bakr II, we are aware of his motives because it was written down. It doesn't just exist in an oral tradition. It actually exists in Arabic documents like the Al-Kalkashandi and the Masalik al-Absar, that he had expanded as far to the north as the Sahara, as far to the north as the desert, as far to the west as far to the south, as the jungle, as far to the east as the Niger, where he was wrestling with other African peoples, the Songhai, and he wanted to cross the ocean because he felt he could expand. Okay.
When he arrived, was his encounter with the indigenous population hostile?
Only in one instance we are aware of hostilities developing, because when strange people enter new territory, the natives might accept them or might not accept them, and hostilities can arise, at least initially. We have cases where fights actually developed in Panama between black Africans and Native Americans.
What I'm getting at is, was his motive in coming to these shores the same as Mr. Columbus?
No. You see, in the case of Columbus, Columbus was a man seeking his fortune, who had not made himself. Abu Bakr II wasn't seeking a fortune, he was already made. He was a great king. He was very rich. He was not seeking the same things as Columbus. He was not driven by the same motives. And we have no evidence of Africans enslaving Native Americans. We have no evidence of them being brought over in situations of captivity. So we have no evidence of that. As I say, hostilities can arise occasionally because of the meeting of two peoples, regardless of race or intention. But we have no evidence that the kind of Columbus enterprise was the same. It was far removed, because the Columbus enterprise, because of the lies of Columbus, it led people coming in millions, a steady, endless stream of Europeans leaving their countries to come in this direction in the hope of finding gold and having people subject to them, etc. This led to a whole different world order.
How does an historian like yourself ascertain that somebody that far back in time was a liar or lied?
Well, because of the conflicting reports, and because of the lot of work has been done recently. One of the works done by Frederick Paul, the New Columbus, where he documents a great deal of things. And I myself, looking over diaries, found inconsistencies, serious inconsistencies, where, for example, Columbus is in Cuba, and the letter arrives from King Ferdinand telling him to come home immediately because someone has appeared at the court, Jaime Ferrer, quarreling about this demarcation line, and which throws a shadow over Columbus. And Columbus pretends that he's too gravely ill to move, would not go back home, and writes in the reply letter that he is certain that Cuba is the continent. Now we know that that is a lie. We know that's dishonesty because I found an earlier letter he wrote 6 months earlier in which he tells a friend that he's certain Cuba is an island because the natives who lived there for centuries have told him so and they could circumnavigate it. You find lies also about South America. When he's sent on the 3rd voyage, he's given 6 ships and 3 are sent down to find this landmass that they hear the Portuguese are talking about. Columbus lands on the landmass, does not come off the ship.
Every time we have friends over for a, should we say, little get-together, we reach for the tower. Tower.
And he claims that South America is an island. He claims that Cuba is the continent. Now obviously, and since there are things that indicate that this is not so, I mean, surely he could be wrong about the New World. I mean, he could be wrong about this being India. He could have made a mistake. He could have thought he was off Asia. You could excuse that. But there are certain things you cannot excuse. You see, the man is deliberately involved in deception because he wanted the Portuguese to gain control of that landmass to the south. Because I actually found the letter he wrote one of his sons, Diego Columbus, in which he tells him that Vespucci is about to appear in court, have him do this and do that. The man would do anything for me. In the regular history, it looks like, hey, Vespucci is the rival. He is trying to fill his hand by allowing the Portuguese to enter Brazil and keeping the Spanish out.
Well, why didn't he land on the landmass? Why did he stay on board his ship? Do you know?
We do not know. He claimed he had arthritis. One could accept that if one did not know how mendacious he was, because why wouldn't he claim that for Spain? Why wouldn't he dispute that landmass? But we have evidence that he was getting money from Spain and Portugal, and he was arrested. You see, the Spanish began to realize that Columbus was lying. He and his brother Bartholomew, some people claim that was his uncle, most people think it was his brother, it doesn't matter, but both of them were arrested. On the fourth voyage, the Spanish allowed Bobadilla to arrest Columbus, and he was brought back in disgrace into Spain to be tried for lying to the Spanish about the lands he said he had discovered. And they claimed in court that Columbus was playing games in order to fill his hands, one hand with Portuguese money and one hand with Spanish money.
He was brought back in custody.
Yes.
And he was tried.
He was tried.
Was he convicted?
No. It appears that, I wouldn't say he won the case, but because some of the things that he would have got, if it were not for the case, he did lose. He didn't lose all of his fortunes. It was reduced and he never sailed again. He never sailed again. So he did suffer as a result of the trial, but there were doubts about certain things, and then there were certain people of influence, it seems. Some people have suggested that there was this relationship or a great affection that the Queen had for him, but that is just news of the world stories, so that one does not know what it is that saved him.
What was it that he brought back from the so-called New World on his voyages? You say he made a total of 4 or 6 voyages?
Four voyages.
4 voyages.
On the first trip, one is aware that he brought back the half a dozen Native Americans who were eventually taught to speak Spanish. And of course...
As slaves?
I wouldn't say they weren't called slaves, but they were brought back against their will. Okay, so I mean you would call it slaves. I don't know if they were placed in positions
captives, at least.
Yes, captives. Okay, and remember that